welcome the audience here at the Exploratorium and online. We have a very exciting show for you tonight. We're going to be connecting with an exploration vessel, the Nautilus, currently off the coast of Galapagos. That's about 3,000 miles away from where we're at now. And we're going to be talking to two of the explorers that are on this vessel, and they're looking at some really historic sites. As you know, the Galapagos is made famous by Darwin, but also made famous by some of the explorers that are on the ship down in the Galapagos now. I'm Mary Miller.
And I'm Ron Hipschman.
And we're going to be your host tonight. We've been following along on these exploration dives of the Nautilus, and we're going to see if we can connect to them now. Nautilus, do we have you?
Hello, it's nice to see you all. Welcome, Exploratorium, to the Nautilus.
Great, it's great to connect with you. Can you introduce yourselves? Tell us a little bit about the role that you play on the Nautilus.
So my name is Ariel. I'm the Science Communication Fellow aboard the ship right now, and I'm a former science teacher, scientist, and I'm currently the Education Manager at Science Friday.
My name is Chuck Fisher. I'm a professor of biology at Penn State University. I'm the co-lead scientist on this. My co-lead is Steve Carey. I'm a biologist. He's a geologist. And I'm a deep-sea biologist that specializes in hydrothermal vent life.
Great. So Chuck, you kind of cut out, but I know that you are the chief scientist and you have background in biology and some of these deep-sea organisms that we're going to be looking at, which is great. We've been following along on this expedition,
yeah.
and it's really wonderful to see some of the very strange creatures. We have some video here that we pulled off of your site of some of these creatures, and I want to ask you, when you see something for the first time, something so weird, how do you figure out what it is?
Well, many of the people on board have got a lot of experience in the deep sea, so often we can recognize at least the family it's in. But if we don't, we also have a Scientist Ashore program, and there on this cruise, 60 scientists that are tuning into the parts of their expedition that they are most interested in, and they help us a lot. The ones that are experts in corals or the different little groups of animals that one of us may not be expert in.
So Chuck, you're kind of cutting out. I'm just going to, I know one of the things, because I have been on the Nautilus before, that there's usually really good expertise in the control room, but you also have this ability, because of telepresence, because of the satellite capability, to bring in other people that are experts that might be at home, because they can connect through your website and see live what's happening and sort of help to figure out what's going on. But then you also have an ability with the ROV to take samples. Can you explain a little bit about that process?
Sure. The first thing we'll do with the ROV is to very carefully take high quality pictures. But then we also have a manipulator arm. We'll take samples, bring them up in a temperature insulated bio box, and prepare those samples both for experts to see what they look like, but we also take samples for DNA. And the DNA analysis is where some of the real kind of exciting finds come, because the animals you don't recognize at all, we can use DNA as our detective tool to see what they are.
And I think one of the important things to think about when you're thinking about the ROV Hercules especially is that it's like a Swiss Army knife. We can install new tools that are specific to specific expeditions. So for example, we have water column samplers. On prior expeditions, we had a sampler that was specific for catching methane bubbles. We've got an arm that we attached for visualizing flow at hydrothermal vents. And we can change these in and out even between dives, which is pretty extraordinary.
Great. So we have a good audience here, and there's actually, this is a special event for us. We're celebrating 4th of July a little early. And we're very patriotic here, but we like to put a science twist on it. So instead of red, white, and blue, we are
doing red, green, and blue.
Which I'm outfitted in.
Sorry, I don't fit in the theme tonight.
And you might be wondering, what is the connection of the Nautilus and ocean research with red, green, and blue? And have no fear, we're going to talk about that. And I think the first question that I have is for Chuck, and that's normally when we see the Nautilus, when we see videos or photographs of the Nautilus, you're in beautiful blue water. It looks just this gorgeous shade. Does that have anything to do with where you choose to dive?
Sometimes, yes. Here on the Galapagos, on the deep seamounts, it is beautiful blue water. But just a few days ago, we were diving on hydrothermal vents, and it was quite smoky water. So we experienced both. And of course, when you see the Nautilus, it's our light that lets you see it and see the water we're in.
Absolutely. And of course, we're also really far off the coast. So we're 300 miles off the coast of mainland Ecuador, which means that runoff, the kind that might generate algal blooms or might color the water bright green, is absent from this area. So this is particularly blue for a variety of reasons, and especially at the depth that we've been diving.
That's great. So, so we have a photo that we're showing our studio audience of a tropical island, also with very, very clear water, and we see the deep blue, but we also see a little bit of turquoise. And I think what we're seeing here is maybe the sand underneath.
I think we're seeing the light go down and hitting the sand and then coming back up through the water.
And so I've asked Ron, because why the ocean is blue is kind of a deep fundamental question about light and about water. And so I asked Ron to do a little bit of explanation about why the ocean is blue. So we have some physics to go through here.
Well, it's kind of interesting. I had to go look it up myself, because actually the ocean is blue for many reasons. Mainly because water actually absorbs things that are not blue, mainly reds and oranges and yellows, but all the light, white light, comes in from the sun and hits the surface of the ocean. It goes down through the water. The water does modify that a little bit by absorbing some of the light, but there's also other things that scatter the light, that send it off in different directions. Some things below the surface of the sea also fluoresce, adding different colors. But if we want to just talk about water itself, water is actually very, very lightly bluish, but you got to look through an awful lot of it to see that. And that all has to do with the structure of the water molecule. Everybody knows water molecule is H2O, so it's an oxygen atom with two hydrogen atoms hanging off it. And let me just, I'll advance the slides here for you. So here we have a water molecule with oxygen and two hydrogens, and those hydrogens are mounted at the ends of chemical bonds that kind of act like springs, and the water molecule can vibrate in different ways, and sunlight makes the water molecule vibrate. If certain colors of sunlight make the molecule vibrate, that light is absorbed and is turned into motion or heat, and so you lose that color of light, that frequency of light. So, for instance, the water molecule can vibrate like this, kind of like lifting weights, lifting those hydrogen atoms up. That's one mode of vibration of the water molecule. Here's a different one. Here the molecules, those springs, are moving in and out now instead of bending. And then there's one more. This one's actually important for the bluish color of light, as is this next one where the springs kind of go alternately in and out. Those two last ones actually preferentially absorb and turn into heat red and orange and yellow light. And so that, as you go through the column of water, you absorb more and more of that red and orange and yellow light, and that leaves behind bluer and bluer and bluer light. And if we actually look at the geeky spectrum of this, I mean, here's the electromagnetic spectrum from the ultraviolet to the infrared, and you can see that in the ultraviolet it's highly absorptive. Water absorbs all the ultraviolet, but then the absorption goes way down in the visible and then back up in the infrared. And if we stretch out now and just look at the visible part of the spectrum, this is just in the visible part, which is all we can perceive with our eyes, you notice that very little is absorbed by the blues and violets, and a little less by the green, and a whole bunch is absorbed by the red. So as light goes through the water, it gets progressively bluer and bluer and bluer.
Bluer until the light is all absorbed and it
That's
becomes
right.
black. And I know from scuba diving, sometimes if I go down about 30 feet something that was red looks black. And
Yes,
that's
your
because
dress would look black because
dress
there's no red light to reflect off of it that
that would
deep.
be a shame. I won't wear this diving.
Don't wear it diving.
Around here in California, though, blue is not the dominant color. If anybody's here from San Francisco, you know, lived along San Francisco Bay or along the coast, very often the water is this color. It's green. And the green is from algae, photosynthetic organisms that live, called phytoplankton, that live in the water, and they are green because they photosynthesize. They have a green pigment. The green pigment absorbs light to help it photosynthesize and reflects the green light. And sometimes we get these events here called plankton blooms, which are really, really an intense event where we get really, really deep, rich green color. And this is a plankton bloom that happens oftentimes in the late spring or early summer.
They live in the water. Why would the season make any difference?
So the seasonality of the plankton blooms has to do with something called upwelling, which is a seasonal winds that blow from the north to the south, and those winds help push surface waters off the coast, and cold, nutrient-rich water comes up. That's exactly the kind of water that phytoplankton like, and they reproduce and bloom, and that actually indicates, green water actually indicates a highly productive system. There's a lot of fish, seabirds, even whales come in during plankton blooms, and so that's why in California, Oregon, and Washington, all along the whole West Coast, we have very, very productive waters.
You know, I've noticed off our pier here, the water is not green like that beautiful green wave. It's more of a kind of a grayish green. Why is that?
Well, so
the case?
in the San Francisco Bay, we actually have a lot of runoff from rivers. So that is sediments, things that come from rivers, and that's more like brown. So when you combine brown and green colors, then it kind of becomes olive green or gray. And so that's blue and green. The ocean actually can also be red itself, and
wow.
This comes from another kind of plankton bloom, one that we've actually been dominated by over the last couple weeks on the West Coast. Is called a red tide, kind of for a little bit obvious reasons, but this is a harmful algal bloom. Oftentimes when you get this kind of a event happen, it produces toxins that are concentrated in shellfish and other kinds of filter-feeding organisms, and that's why we haven't been able to eat clams. There's a ban on eating razor clams in Washington right now because this red tide goes all the way up to Washington.
Wow.
But that's kind of a downer about red. There's actually something I want to connect back to the ship with about red, and that is a very, very special organism I think they've been seeing a lot of. There's a lot of this down the Galapagos, and that is called a red tube worm. And I want to ask, on the bottom of the ocean, there's no light, as Ron said, but you have this beautiful red color. Where does that red come from?
Well, in the giant tube worms, the red you see sticking out of their white tube is their plume, also known as their gill, and the red color is hemoglobin. They have a giant hemoglobin molecule in their blood that functions much like ours, to carry oxygen and dissolve gases to their tissues.
I'm sorry, I think we lost Chuck. We're gonna, I mean, your audio is not coming through. I think, you know, you are the expert on red tube worms. I'll try to fill in a little. The animals that live on these hydrothermal vents, they actually use the chemicals. Maybe, Chuck, you can pick that up about how they survive in toxic plumes.
So one of the things, and I've been learning from Chuck this whole time, so these hemoglobin molecules, they're similar to the ones that we have, but they're much larger, and they bind to sulfur specifically very strongly. And so what that does is they are able to capture it in those red plumes that you saw, capture that sulfur and actually deliver it safely through the tissues of the tube worm to their trophosome, which is like a large gut full of bacteria. It's absolutely disgusting, but it is terribly cool. It's exactly how these things are able to survive in the toxic environment you described. And the bacteria in that troposome are able to metabolize it, convert it into energy that can then be used for the tube worm. And we've seen a lot of things that do that use bacteria in this way.
Sure, the tube worms, the clams, the mussels. The clams also have a bright red hemoglobin with bright red tissues, and their blood also carries sulfide and oxygen. So there's some really amazing evolutionary adaptations in these animals that allow them not only to tolerate the toxic environment, but to thrive in it. These are some of the fastest growing animals you'll find anywhere.
So we're looking at this video of kind of panning across this whole community, and I think it shows us, and the Galapagos was really was the place where these organisms were discovered, which makes it a really, really important historic site. But it also is this very profound discovery that life can exist without sunlight. That that you can have a community of clams and fish and crabs and shrimp that all live in what most people would have considered a dead zone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's absolutely right. When the vents were first to be discovered, biologists were invited on the expedition, and they decided not to go. They thought it would be boring. But what we found, to the surprise of everybody, was lush communities of life, like you've described. And the basis of the food chain there is a process called chemosynthesis. It's very analogous to photosynthesis, which green plants use to harvest the energy in sunlight, fix carbon, and feed the surface of the earth. Well, down around vents, bacteria harness the energy in reduced chemicals, like hydrogen sulfide, and use that energy to fix carbon and produce the food that all of the vent animals live on.
Oh, that's really fantastic. As I said, we have a great studio audience here, and we're going to see if anybody has any questions. Maybe I'll ask Ron if he's got any questions first.
I do. Now we have a slide here that we wanted to show. On the robot arm from Hercules, because we have to keep in our RGB theme here, there looks like there's stripes on the arm, and our slide is on the upper right-hand side. You can see there's a red, a green, and a blue stripe on that arm. Why is there an RGB stripe on the arm?
Yep, that's exactly right. So for our videographer and our video engineers, calibrating the video stream that we stream live through telepresence to the world is incredibly important. So at the beginning of every dive, we'll shoot the camera right at that Hercules predator arm, as you mentioned, on those three stripes, and make sure that our red, green, and blue are running true through our video system. And that's really important for a variety of reasons. It can help us identify organisms. It can help us understand whether they are healthy or whether the vent that they're at is maybe dwindling and venting less. For instance, these tube worms that we saw, if they're not as bright or as rich of a red, that's an indication that they're not doing quite as well. And so having that RGB calibration at the beginning of every dive is incredibly important. And that's the most convenient way to do it.
And many of the animals, we have no idea what color they are. So we want to make sure our camera is shooting true colors. And that's how we make sure that's true.
Great question. Any other questions from the audience?
Let's see if we have any questions from our audience for the Nautilus. Nobody has a question for the Nautilus? Oh, there's one over there. Okay, hang on. Let me get the microphone over there.
Hi there. Thanks so much for kind of taking the time to beam with us from so far away. I was wondering, I've learned a lot about acidification and its effect on the coral reefs, and I was wondering if you could comment on any understanding that you have on climate change and how that might have an effect on these very deep water populations.
Sure. It will, most certainly. We thought at first that it would take a long time because of the circulation time of deep ocean waters. And many of the deep ocean waters, in fact, do sink in the Arctic and take several thousand years to make it to where they come up into shallower water. So it would be a long time before those waters are affected. But we're already starting to see the effects in the deep sea in places like the Gulf of Mexico and other bodies of water that are fairly well mixed. And we are seeing changes in pH in the ocean at depth already. And that will affect corals, clams, anything that calcifies in the deep sea the same way it would affect those organisms in shallower water.
Yeah, that's a great question.
We have any other questions we can ask?
So I have a question for Ariel and Chuck. 4th of July is a couple days away. How are you going to celebrate on the ship, and what are you looking forward to? What's upcoming for the Nautilus?
That's a great question, too. So we're headed to one of our deepest dives of the season, actually, here tonight. We'll be diving through tomorrow, which is kind of a fun way to ring in the new year. We'll be diving to the Galapagos platform. It's the lava flows that actually form the Galapagos Island archipelago, and so we'll be diving down there and doing some great geology, which for scientists is totally a celebration. And for, as far as the actual 4th of July, that's a really good question. I'm actually not sure what we'll do.
Take a guess. I doubt we'll have fireworks because we're pretty careful about fire at sea. We do have excellent barbecues and picnics on board, but of course we work 24 hours a day, and that ROV should be on the bottom throughout most of the 4th. So although there'll be watches celebrating with a picnic, and we might be allowed one beer apiece, we'll have to kind of refrain ourselves from being a too joyous celebration until we hit shore.
So I have a question that's kind of related to 4th of July. When you're out on the boat, do you see bioluminescent organisms? So you sort of a marine fireworks.
Beeping. Chuck was probably in the middle of explaining about bioluminescence, but we're going to have to wrap up here. I want to really thank Ariel, Chuck, and the crew of the Nautilus and the Interspace Center for connecting us today. Here at the webcast studio, we want to wish you good luck on your mission in the Galapagos. Bye-bye for now. We'll just wave because our audio dropped out. You can follow along with the Nautilus on nautiluslive.org. For Ron and the entire webcast crew, thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the show.